Today we are exploring a foundational challenge at the intersection of artificial intelligence and law. This story has played out across more than 18 countries, and it centers on one AI named Davis. It's a case that has forced legal systems around the globe to ask a very new and very profound question. Can a machine actually be an inventor?
To understand this complex legal saga, we'll follow a clear roadmap. First, we'll look at how this challenge even began. Then we'll examine the key decisions from the major legal systems. After that, we'll explore the few exceptions to the rule, and finally, we'll synthesize what this all means for the future of innovation and law.
So, where does this story begin? It starts with a physicist and AI researcher, Dr. Stephen Thaler, and his creation, an AI system that he argues possesses a form of artificial sentience.
The system's name is Davis. It's essentially two interacting neural networks designed to generate new ideas. And here's the crucial part. Dr. Thaler claims Davis operates with autonomy. He asserts that it independently came up with two inventions, a new kind of food container and a flashing light beacon, without him feeding it specific data or prompts for those problems.
Now, you have to understand, this was a very deliberate and strategic decision. Dr. Thaler and his team, known as the Artificial Inventor Project, could have easily taken the simple route. They could have just named a person as the inventor and called Davis a very advanced tool, but they didn't. They chose the hard path, naming the machine itself as the inventor. This was a test case designed specifically to force the world's patent offices to answer the AI inventorship question head-on.
Their legal argument, which they presented in every single country, really boiled down to two core ideas. First, they argued that the legal definition of an inventor should be flexible enough to include a non-human AI. And second, they argued that Dr. Thaler, as the owner of the machine, should be entitled to the patents through an old property law principle called the doctrine of accession.
All right, so how did the world's legal systems respond to this challenge? Let's start with two of the heavyweights in global patent law, the United States and the United Kingdom. They both came to the exact same conclusion, but they got there by sticking very closely to the literal text of their laws.
In the United States, the rejection was immediate, and it was absolute. It just cascaded through the entire court system, from the Patent Office itself to the District Court, then the Federal Circuit, and finally the Supreme Court, which refused to even hear the appeal. At every single level, the answer was a clear, unambiguous no.
What's fascinating is that both the US and UK courts relied on what's called textualism, basically looking at the plain meaning of the words in the law. The US courts looked at the word individual in their Patent Act and said, that pretty clearly means a human being. The UK courts looked at their own law, which uses the phrase actual divisor, and came to the same conclusion. That word divisor also implies a human.
So this brings us back to Dr. Thaler's second big argument, about entitlement through accession. This is a really old legal idea. The classic analogy is straightforward. If you own a cow, you also own any calf it produces. Thaler's team argued that by the same logic, because he owns the AI, Davis, he should own what it produces, in this case, the inventions.
But this is where the UK Supreme Court put up a second and maybe even stronger roadblock. They completely dismantled that accession argument. They ruled that the doctrine works for tangible property, things you can touch, like a calf. But it does not apply to intangible property, like an invention. And why not? Because, the court said, an invention is fundamentally a product of the human mind. And since Davis isn't human, the entire argument just falls apart.
And this issue wasn't just confined to common law countries. Other major players, like the European Patent Office in Australia, also rejected the Davis applications. And interestingly, they all landed on the same fundamental problem.
The European Patent Office, or EPO, focused on the idea of legal capacity. Their argument was that an inventor needs to be a legal entity that can hold rights and, crucially, transfer those rights to someone else. A machine has no legal capacity to do either. Australia's High Court reasoned along similar lines, stating that their whole patent system is built on the premise that an invention comes from the mind of a person. In both cases, they saw a broken chain of title. There was simply no legal way for ownership of an invention to pass from a non-person to a person.
Now, amidst this worldwide pattern of rejection, two countries actually stand out as exceptions. But as we're about to see, these so-called wins for Davis aren't quite what they appear to be. In a funny way, they actually end up reinforcing the dominant legal consensus.
So, South Africa did in fact grant a patent that names Davis as the inventor. But, and this is a big but, it was a purely administrative act.
South Africa has what's called a depository system, which means they just check if you filled out the forms correctly. They don't judge the legal substance. It's not a precedent. Germany, on the other hand, offered a much more thoughtful and pragmatic compromise.
What the German Federal Court of Justice did was quite clever. They agreed that yes, under the law, an AI cannot be an inventor. A human must be named. However, they created a practical workaround. They said you can grant the patent if a human is listed, not necessarily as the one who conceived the idea, but maybe as the person who prompted the AI. And then you can include an addendum that explains the AI's role. This way, they respected the letter of the law while still achieving the policy goal of letting the invention be protected.
Okay, so after that tour around the world, where does that leave us? Well, what's clear is that Dr. Thaler's project, even though it was mostly unsuccessful in court, has absolutely succeeded in highlighting a deep conflict between our 20th century laws and the realities of 21st century technology.
Just take a moment to look at this summary table. You can really see the global pattern. The vast majority of rejections are based on one of two key arguments, either the literal definition of an inventor as a human or this problem of the broken legal chain of rights. And against that broad consensus, you see the unique outliers of South Africa and Germany.
This has created what you can only really call a procedural catch-22. The courts aren't saying the inventions themselves are bad. In fact, they might be perfectly patentable. They could be new, useful, and non-obvious, but they're still blocked from the patent system, all because of a procedural formality, the inability to name a legally valid human inventor.
And this isn't just a theoretical problem. This legal gridlock has two very real, very negative consequences. First, it creates an ethics trap. It could force an applicant to lie and name a human who wasn't really the inventor, which risks committing fraud. And second, it creates a trade secret dilemma. It encourages companies to just hide their AI-generated innovations, which completely undermines the whole point of the patent system, to get people to share their inventions publicly.
The courts in the US, the UK, and elsewhere have made it very clear. This is not a problem for judges to fix. This is a job for lawmakers. So the debate has now moved out of the courtroom and into legislatures and international bodies like the World Intellectual Property Organization. There are really three main options on the table: do nothing and live with the consequences, amend the existing laws to solve the problem, or create a brand new, custom-built intellectual property right just for AI creations.
In the end, you could say that while Dr. Thaler lost most of his legal battles, the Artificial Inventor Project has absolutely won the larger policy debate. It is proven without a doubt that our current laws are simply not equipped for a future of autonomous AI invention. The question now isn't if the law will have to change. The question is how and who will be the ones to write that next crucial chapter.